Robert and I have known each other for 30 years, I guess. And we share Brooklyn as a kind of common thread in our relationship.
Our initial plan was to get the building and, make it, again, one of the feature buildings in Brooklyn, which is just this small community. The Oddfellows Hall is the largest building in town. It just turned out that, John was really interested in the building, and Steve White, who's lived here his whole life and runs Brooklyn Boatyard, also had an interest in the building. I think my initial thoughts were to help get the building restored, but it turned out that we were able to purchase the second floor, which really made the project viable. One of the big challenges was to restore all the monumental windows in the building.
It was a lot of fun to figure out how to learn something new. There wasn't anything that we thought, oh, we can't do that. There were a lot of things that we thought we're going to have to learn how to do that, and we did, and it was awesome. I really enjoyed restoring all of those windows.
We ultimately had to remove all of the walls on the first floor of the building that supported the second and third floor. And Steve White's plan was to open that first floor up, and it was approved by the State Historic Preservation Office to open that space up, but we had to leave remnants of the historical walls on the first floor. So we had to leave essentially like soffits where the old walls were, and we had to put a 45-foot steel beam right through the middle of the building and support the building and then install that beam. Then we had to figure out how to get a 45-foot steel beam into the building and get it lifted into place and then supported on steel posts. We actually ended up building temporary walls in the building and then moved the steel beam in between those walls, hoisted it up into place, installed big steel columns underneath it, and then we actually lowered the center of the building down onto that beam, which was pretty precarious, it seemed at the time. But once we lowered the building onto that beam, it solved a lot of problems.
If you can imagine, that room was 5 different rooms before we took all the walls down. And every room was a different color. So we took all of the beadboard off the walls, de-nailed it, cleaned up all the edges. And once it was all cleaned up in all kinds of various lengths, there wasn't anything really uniform about it, we sent it down to Steve White's Boatyard, and they ran it through their planer and took off the top layer of everything and sent it back up to be installed. And originally the thought was that he was going to repaint everything white when it got put back in. And because everything was varying lengths and sizes, when they started installing it, they were grabbing from all different piles. And what it created was this amazing art piece on the ceilings and walls that we weren't expecting at all. Steve was like, I'm not painting that. And I'm so glad, because really when you walk in there, you can look at the ceiling and see, what was part of the original store and what was part of the town offices. But on the third floor, they have like a 14-foot ceiling height. And John really wanted to keep all of the plaster in the big ballroom as it was, with all the really cool cracks and stuff in there. So we had to clean it all up really well, and then reapply a lime wash to 2,600 square feet. And with a lime wash, type of lime wash you use, it's all applied by hand. You can't use rollers. So we spent a lot of time, going like this. It seemed like for weeks our arms were so sore, but it was really fun to have my dad and my brother and my husband and I all plastering this huge room together.
Robert and Eden and James and the entire family, along with Steve White, it was just a great partnership. We got along really well and are still all good friends. And so we, basically saved a building that's beloved to the community, and it's being used in a kind of sensible way.
I think it was so cool to A, be able to work on it and be a part of it, but B, turn it into something that's useful. Maine has so many amazing old buildings that are derelict or kind of cast aside, and people think like, oh, it would be great if someone would do something with that. Actually figuring out how to make that possible is huge. Figure out how to make buildings useful so that we can give them the care and attention that they really need.
This is as close as you get to a palace in Maine.